Republican Congressman Ron DeSantis, who sits on both the Foreign Affairs and Judiciary committees.
And we get an unprecedented look at our military's fight against ISIS, courtesy of a brand new National Geographic special.
We want to fight the away game. We want to take care of business here. I know personally I don't want our nation, in fact, any of our allied nations, to have to deal with this enemy. And so we got to go get after them here today and take care of business.
And President Trump kicks off the long weekend in Mar-a-Lago with an early morning tweet storm, suggesting that lawmakers are far from reaching a deal on DACA and accusing Democrats of stalling those negotiations. For more on all of this, let's go live to Phil Keating. He's in West Palm Beach. Phil, what can you tell us?
Well, Jillian, President Trump should be wrapping up his morning golf game at the nearby Trump International Golf Club, where he arrived this morning in the big long motorcade right around 9:30 this morning. And as is the usual scenario when the president is at his winter White House on Palm Beach, he begins the morning bright and early tweeting. This morning, he was praising the economy and digging at Democrats, including this one about the ongoing DACA negotiations, what to do with the estimated 700,000 dreamers in the country. Quote, the Democrats are all talk, no action. They are doing nothing to fix DACA. Great opportunity missed. Too bad. Of course, it was that Oval Office meeting Thursday about DACA and immigration, which led to the all-consuming controversy about what members of both parties confirmed the president said about Haiti, El Salvador, and African nations, leading to these shouted questions after Trump's proclamation expanding the Martin Luther King Jr. Historic Site Friday.
Mr. President, are you a racist?
No answers from the president Friday. Now, throughout the day, Florida Republicans, including Senator Marco Rubio and Congressman Carlos Curbelo, as well as the governor, strongly distanced themselves from the president's remark in a state that is home to many immigrants and their families, including 300,000 Haitian Americans, some of whom protested the president's comments yesterday while commemorating the 8th anniversary of that country's devastating earthquake. And on David Letterman's new Netflix show, his very first guest, none other than former President Barack Obama, who said this without mentioning the current president's name.
One of the things that Michelle figured out in some ways faster than I did was, part of your ability to lead the country doesn't have to do with legislation. It doesn't have to do with regulations. It has to do with shaping attitudes, shaping culture, increasing awareness.
As soon as the president is finished at the golf club, he is expected to then motorcade back to his winter White House at Mar-a-Lago on Palm Beach, only about an 8 or 10 minute drive. And the president has no public events scheduled, not only today, tomorrow, or Monday. And it is Monday afternoon. We expect that the president and First Lady Melania and son Barron will be boarding on Air Force One and returning to the nation's capital. Jillian?
Phil, I had to take a double take there at David Letterman. Barely recognized him.
I need to grow one.
You do. All right, well, stay cool out there at Mar-a-Lago. Thanks, Phil.
President Trump has tied DACA and immigration to the budget debate, and with just days before lawmakers are faced with another potential government shutdown, the clock is ticking for a solution. Our Molly Henneberg has the latest developments. Hi, Molly.
Hi, Mike. It's no simple task to weave together lawmakers' immigration priorities into one bill. Democrats are saying, let's just focus on young illegal minors first and then get to the rest. But Republicans say not so fast. They want border security, too, and say they've been promised funding for a border wall before, and then the funding didn't come through.
I'm so mistrustful. I think that we keep our promise first and then not give up our leverage until we've built that wall.
But Democrats say why wait? They believe they have enough bipartisan support to extend what's called DACA to protect some 800,000 illegal minors from deportation, and also to pass the DREAM Act, which gives them a pathway to legal status.
It would take 15 minutes on the floor of the House to pass it, and we may as well get it done and signal to the American people that when we have all these other big issues, like budget problems, like the lack of an infrastructure bill, like real problems in health care that we ought to address, that Congress actually can come together and overcome what looks like differences.
Legislators had hoped to include immigration reform in a bill to keep funding of the government, but that spending bill has to be done by next Friday, and it doesn't appear at this point that there's enough agreement to include immigration in that legislation. Mike?
Our Molly Hemberg live in Washington. Molly, thanks a lot.
For more on the battle over budget and immigration, I want to bring in Scott Wong. He's a senior reporter at The Hill. Scott, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Take a look at these facts we've got for you on immigration. This is the immigrant population in the United States by country of birth in 2016. It's the latest numbers we've got. We're looking at total immigration from Africa at 2.14 million. El Salvador, as you can see there, is 1.3 million. Haiti, just over 500,000 at 668,000 there, and Norway at 22,000. So allegedly, these are the types of figures that the president was reacting to earlier this week in the meeting with lawmakers where he used an expletive, reportedly. What do you make of this? The numbers don't look very high to me.
Well, I think a number of Republicans pointed out that, you know, we all have immigrant backgrounds in our ancestry. And so that was a point, I believe, that Lindsey Graham made to the president in pushing back to some of these remarks. One of the most personal, I think, responses to the president's controversial comments came from Mia Love, who is the first Haitian American Republican lawmaker to serve in the United States Congress. Her parents were born in Haiti and came to the United States looking for a better future for their family. And so I think, you know, some of the backlash that we've seen in response to President Trump, you know, is coming from not only from the left, but from Republicans as well.
If you break down the numbers a little bit, I was just struck by, whether the reporting about the expletive is right or wrong, the numbers, like, for example, African immigration today in the United States total is 2 million people, but that's almost 60 countries. I thought it would be a lot higher. So I was just remarking that, you know, this is not an all-time high of immigration as we are being made to believe. I want to ask you also about the president wanting to get rid of the diversity lottery system for visas. He believes this will help put an end to what the administration calls chain migration. He says that what he wants is merit-based immigration. As you know, that essentially means people meet certain qualifications before they're able to come into the country. Can you tell us about those qualifications, what they are?
I don't have any specifics on the qualifications themselves, but President Trump did, when Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin brought this plan to the president, this bipartisan plan, you know, essentially it would shift, it would do away with the diversity lottery, which is a random lottery program, and it would shift some of those 50,000 slots over to the TPS program, which are the countries like Haiti, like El Salvador.
The temporary protected status,
yes,
right? That's
temporary
TPS?
Protected status.
Okay.
And the president said, well, let's not deal with those countries. Why can't we make this all about merit? And remember, these were comments that he made 2 days earlier in the televised meeting in the White House, where he said, who would disagree with bringing in people based on a merit system? And so this is something that the president has insisted on. He has suggested this to Congress. So far, Democrats have not signed on board. They're pushing back against a merit-based system, and they want other assurances for DACA at this point. So,
but what is it, the administration, as far as I can tell, has not really clearly defined what those merits are. They've alluded to the idea that people should speak English prior to coming into the United States. That's one qualification. Another qualification is that they should be prepared to, in some way, contribute to the national economy. Am I missing anything?
I don't think we've seen any specifics so far, but I think what the president is talking about are professionals like doctors, for example, doctors from other countries coming to the United States, graduate students who want to further their education and take advantages of the good colleges in the United States. So those are some of the examples of the types of people that I think President Trump is saying, let's make this all about merit. Let's take the best and the brightest from around the world and let them come to the country rather than a random lottery drawing.
A final question on there, though. How do those qualifications compare with the refugee population? So meaning the United States agreeing to take in people who are fleeing persecution and war and terrorism all around the world? Or are we going to still keep refugees as a separate category of entrance into the United States, or they'll get bundled into these immigrant populations, these merit-based folks?
I think that's what's being discussed. If you do away completely with the lottery system, the bipartisan plan that Lindsey Graham and Dick Durbin had put forward would have shifted those 50,000 slots over to some of these countries that are dealing with either man-made disasters, civil war, strife, or natural disasters like we saw in El Salvador and in Haiti. So there's a lot of questions that still have not been resolved. The president's comments the other day, the controversial remarks, have only sort of inflamed the situation. I think Democrats and Republicans have been driven into their respective corners. That's not a great place to be with 4 legislative days before a government shutdown.
Yeah, as you point out, a lot of loose ends, a lot of major questions here that will affect all Americans that need to be hammered out on the Hill, on the White House in the next 4 days. Scott Wong, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Mike?
A third high-profile Republican has thrown her name into the ring for Arizona's open Senate seat in 2018. Arizona Congresswoman Martha McSally officially announced her candidacy Friday. The former Air Force colonel and first female fighter pilot to fly a combat mission took a World War II fighter plane across the state to campaign, tying her service record into how she'll work in the Senate.
I'm running my race, and we want to make sure that people of Arizona know the options that they have for a fighter and a winner to serve in Arizona, and I'm working with this president. If you look at my voting record, even though I'm in a split district in southern Arizona, I have the most reliable voting record with the president, and I intend to continue to work with him. I was just at the White House this week, and I've been invited on other times to talk about health care, tax reform, infrastructure, and now immigration, and I'm honored about that.
McSally faces competition for the Republican nomination. Former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio and former State Senator Kelly Ward. That should be a heck of a race for the Republican nomination.
You know, and I've got to say, a woman, female fighter pilot throwing her hat in the ring to run for the Senate, I mean, not a day too soon in this kind of climate. This is exactly the kind of thing that Americans all across the country have been calling for.
Strong on national security.
Yep.
And Jeff Flake's retiring, so they're throwing their hat in there.
Yep, feeling good about that. Well, brand new details emerging on the Las Vegas mass shooter from last year and just how meticulous he was in covering up his trail leading up to that deadly massacre. Plus, a major milestone for firefighters in the state of California who have given their all for weeks to save lives and billions of dollars of property. Plus, we'll get an update on the devastating mudslides that followed flames in Southern California.
Terrifying noises. It sounded like 100 people with huge logs slamming into the house every 3 seconds. There was a moment where I turned and apologized to my folks because I didn't force them to evacuate. So there was a really emotional moment.
After burning for more than a month, officials have declared the largest fire in California's history finally contained. Ventura and Santa Barbara counties are now recovering from the Thomas Fire, the blaze that scorched an area nearly the size of Los Angeles and burned more than 1,000 buildings and killed 2 people. Authorities still don't know what caused the fire.
And devastating mudslides in Santa Barbara County are forcing more evacuations. Some of the folks, the same residents who fled the Thomas Fire just a few weeks ago. 7 people are reported missing in Montecito at this hour. Cleanup crews are also working hard to clear the streets of debris, trees, and even boulders. 18 people in total have died as a result of these mudslides.
New details are emerging in the investigation into the Las Vegas attack that killed 58 concertgoers in October. More than 300 pages of court documents are giving more insight into how the gunman planned the deadliest mass shooting in modern American history. Will Carr joins us now with the findings. Will?
And Mike, search warrants show the gunman had an arsenal in both his hotel room and in one of his homes. Authorities discovered more than 20 guns and hundreds of rounds of ammunition in the Mandalay Bay hotel room where the shooter was perched as he unloaded on concert goers. We've also learned the gunman's girlfriend, Mary Lou Danley, told law enforcement that her fingerprints would likely be found on the bullets used during the attack. Interestingly, warrants also show that she deleted her Facebook account an hour before authorities announced the shooter's name publicly. Danley has not been charged with anything and is said to be cooperating. We've also learned as authorities continue to look for a motive, the gunman may have been emailing himself. Those emails include a discussion about trying out bump stocks, a piece of equipment that allows a gun to fire more rapidly. 12 of those were found in the shooter's hotel room. As a result, there's been a nationwide call to ban bump stocks, and the governor of Connecticut has proposed legislation to do just that, but not all gun store owners agree.
While bump stocks don't change the mechanics of the weapon they are attached to, they increase the rate of fire to machine gun-like speeds. Simply put, these devices are cheap, they are deadly, and they are completely and utterly unnecessary in our society.
The way I see it, it's just a recreational thing, you know. It's not anything too dangerous. And if they want to ban it, it's their choice, but I don't really question things like that.
There's currently legislation in Congress to ban bump stocks. At the same time, the DOJ is studying the legality of certain bump stocks, a process that could take between 8 and 12 months. Mike.
Will Carr live from our West Coast newsroom. Will, thanks very much.
Still ahead, Florida Congressman Ron DeSantis joins us with the latest on the Russia investigation. And after a week of bipartisan meetings and discussions on DACA, President Trump says lawmakers are not any closer to an agreement. Our fair and balanced panel joins us to weigh in. Plus, we take a look at a brand new series that's got unprecedented access into the most high-tech and top-secret military locations around the world. Stick with us.
A camera has never been allowed to film inside the cockpit of an F-22 on a mission. Until now.
Embattled former Trump administration chief strategist Steve Bannon is expected to speak with the House Intelligence Committee this week, but some members of Congress say they want more transparency on what exactly that committee has discovered so far. Congressman Ron DeSantis joins me now from the great state of Florida. Congressman, good to see you.
Good to see you.
You sent a letter to House Speaker Paul Ryan this week. What do you want the Speaker to do, sir?
Well, we have the ability under our House rules to declassify classified documents that are in the possession of the Intelligence Committee. And we just had the major breakthrough where DOJ and FBI finally agreed to provide the information regarding the Trump dossier, the FISA surveillance, all those questions that we've had for months. And I think all the members of Congress will eventually be read into that, and even people not on the Intelligence Committee will be able to review it. And I think that's good, but to me that's inadequate. I think the American people need to know how this information was used. Did you have one administration spying on the campaign of an opposing party? And we have reports that the dossier was in fact used to get FISA surveillance on a Trump associate. I mean, one of the questions I have is, did the FBI, when they got the dossier, did they know that that was a Democratic Party funded document and then still went ahead and used it? That's bad. But then if they didn't know the genesis of it, if they didn't know the origin of it and yet still used it, that's also bad. So I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and the best way to do it is to cut through the smoke and declassify it and make it public.
I've got a copy of your January 9th letter here. Have you gotten any response from the Speaker or his team so far?
So I talked to the Speaker last week about getting in all the other members of Congress read into this. He was very open to that. I think the Speaker's done a good job on this. I mean, he has backed up Devin Nunes. He told Rosenstein, you got to produce the stuff. So I think the Speaker's going to be open to it. And I've also talked to Chairman Nunes, and he is definitely willing to move forward with trying to invoke a declassification order from his committee, which is great.
To be fair, there are a lot of great patriotic professionals at the FBI. I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but what are your concerns about the role of some at the FBI as it relates to the House Intelligence Committee investigation?
Well, you're right. We have phenomenal FBI agents serving all over the country and all over the world. My fear with all this is that the bad actions of a few people like Peter Strzok, who said we can't take the risk of a Trump presidency and needed an insurance policy, people like Lisa Page, that their political actions and the way they conducted themselves will make the Bureau look bad. I still have confidence in the FBI writ large, but I think there's been a problem with the leadership going back to the Hillary email investigation and then through this Trump so-called Russia collusion investigation that is going to need to be addressed. We've seen it be addressed so far to a certain extent. Comey's been fired. McCabe's on his way out. Bruce Orr has been demoted. Strzok is effectively in an administrative position. So let's just get all the facts. Let's hold people accountable, and then let's move forward. We need a strong FBI, and I'm 100% in favor of a strong law enforcement.
This is not your first rodeo on Capitol Hill. Do you expect those documents will be declassified, Congressman?
I think there's a very good chance that they will be, yes, because the public interest is intense in this, and you can declassify it in a way that if there is some type of source and method, you can protect that but still get the information out to the people.
There were high-profile issues at the IRS several years ago. Should anyone be surprised that some at the FBI may have played politics?
Well, I think that's a good point. Lois Lerner, the FBI kind of ringleader of the targeting, she was not a political appointee of the Obama administration. She was a career official. The media will often say that the career people are not partisan. Yeah, they're on the outer veneer, they may not be. They don't have a political position, but they can often act in partisan ways. Lerner did that to the hilt. And when you read those Peter Strzok and Lisa Page text messages, you know, it wasn't that they were Democrats versus Republicans. They just had an intense antipathy and bias against Donald J. Trump. They did not want him to be president, and they wanted to make sure there was an insurance policy to prevent it.
Congressman, are you getting all the answers you want on this Steele dossier and this investigation at this stage?
Well, we haven't gotten them all yet, but I think the fact that this information is going to be provided to the Congress is a huge step forward. It's a big victory for us. We're going to get all these answers one way or another. I wish we would have gotten them sooner, but I think over the next probably 2 months between this and then the IG report with the Hillary email investigation, I think you're going to see a lot of scrutiny on how the Obama DOJ handled these cases in 2016.
Congressman Ron DeSantis of the great state of Florida, look forward to seeing you back here on the Hill, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
After a heated election, Virginia now has its new governor. Democrat Ralph Northam, who defeated Republican Ed Gillespie in a very contentious race, was sworn in today at noon in Richmond. He addressed a crowd of about 4,000 spectators who braved very cold weather to watch. Northam called for unity amongst all Virginians.
It can be hard to find our way in a time when there's so much shouting, when nasty, shallow tweets take the place of honest debate. If you felt that way, I want you to listen to me right now. We are bigger than this. So help me God.
Northam's the 73rd governor in the state's history.
After holding bipartisan meetings on immigration and DACA earlier in the week, President Trump is now slamming Democrats over what he's called a missed opportunity. The president took to Twitter this morning saying Democrats are, quote, all talk and no action. For more on the immigration debate, let's bring in our fair and balanced panel. Brad Blakeman is a former deputy assistant to President George W. Bush, and Al Motter is a Democratic strategist and a member of the Clinton finance team. Former member of the Clinton finance team, easy for me to say. Gentlemen, thanks for your time. Nice to see you. Happy New Year.
Great to be here.
Brad, let's start with you. Your thoughts on the president lashing out at Democrats today on Twitter?
I think he's absolutely right. Democrats did not come into that bipartisan meeting with any intention of dealing in good faith. And how do we know that? Because Dick Durbin feigned outrage at what the president may have said during that meeting, but he didn't confront the president at the time of that meeting or during that meeting. And when he left the White House, he didn't go to the sticks in front of the press corps and show his outrage. This was calculated now by the Democrats that they're going to have a scorched earth policy. They want a government shutdown. They don't want to deal on immigration. They think they can get away with blaming the Trump administration. The president went to deal in good faith. He said it during the meeting we saw a week ago. He said it with a bipartisan committee that we saw a few days ago. And now Democrats have taken the tack that the president cannot be dealt with. He could be dealt with. He should have been dealt with. And instead, they seek to attack him.
Al, your response?
I mean, that's about the best spin I've ever heard. I mean, the president engaged in hateful vitriol. Okay? This is not the America that we were raised to believe in. When Ronald Reagan left the White House in his farewell address, he talked about a shining city on a hill. He talked about a place where we had doors, but they were open to anyone around the world who had the will and heart to get here. That's not what this president's talking about. And Dick Durbin and all the Democrats did come in good faith to that really commendable meeting on Tuesday, and the president should be commended for that meeting. And that was a bipartisan, a great discussion. But then he unraveled the whole thing with what he said.
My guess is plenty of presidents from both parties have used some colorful language at times behind closed doors. But, Brad, are you surprised this president did it in a bipartisan meeting, which it was the other night?
No, there are some words, and of course the president denies he said the words that are alleged. But let me tell you something. In negotiation, especially with legislators, things are going to be said that are never intended for public consumption. It's the heat of the moment. There's also context to what was said. What happened before the harsh words that the president used? He agreed he used harsh words. He just didn't agree to those words. And what came after that? And for the Democrats to think they're holier than thou, they've never heard a president speak that way. I guess they never listened to the LBJ tapes where he used not only foul language, but racial language against black Americans. So when Dick Durbin said language has never been used in the Oval Office, then he should be listening to the LBJ tapes. And LBJ, what was he able to do? He passed civil rights legislation.
Right.
And the president wanted to deal in good faith with Democrats. They reneged on that by leaking and lying, in my opinion, the private conversations of negotiation which happened in the White House.
Look, no one's denying that he said it other than one man, the president, who has a history of saying things that are a little untrue. And what we have here is a situation, it's so sad, because this is a look right into his dark soul. These are chilling and dispiriting comments. And when you strive to come to this country from Haiti or Nigeria or somewhere else, you do so to emerge from a tough situation.
Right.
And we should want people who have the fortitude and wherewithal to come here, not discourage them and cast them aside.
What about the timing of all this, gentlemen? We're heading into perhaps a potential government shutdown in less than a week. He needs to get Democrats to vote for some things, to get some things across the finish line. What about the timing, and what about the week ahead?
I still think we'll get through this. I don't believe there'll be a shutdown.
Brad?
I hope you're correct. I hope that there isn't a shutdown. We shouldn't be politicizing the economy and the health of the American workers. And that's the federal workers and also the private workers who would be affected by a government shutdown. We shouldn't be doing that. We shouldn't be holding people hostage. And I do believe DACA, if Democrats want to work in good faith, there's still an opportunity with this president to do it. He's probably the most transactional president they'll ever have the opportunity to do that with. And it's a missed opportunity if they don't.
What about the Democrats have tried to link DACA to some of the funding talks, feeling like they have some leverage because Democratic votes will be needed to get some of these funding things across the finish line? How does that play out? Does this get separated? Do they say, hey, guys, we really tried on DACA, let's do it later in the month, or let's do it by March, or where are we going there?
I mean, there's not much time, which you just alluded to, but I'm still hopeful that there can be a bipartisan deal that includes border security and DACA protections. A bunch of senators came to the White House earlier with a proposal that included that. So there's a chance. But again, these comments make it tougher because that riles up the base for good reason.
Right.
But nobody would have ever known about those comments had the Democrats not rushed out in a coordinated effort to scuttle it.
Fascinating discussion. Al Motter, Brad Blakeman. Gentlemen, thanks for your time.
Good to be with you.
It's often hard for us civilians to understand exactly what the members of our military are up against when fighting ISIS and other extremist groups overseas. But when we come back after the break, we'll take a close look at a new documentary that offers unprecedented access to the men and the women fighting extremism across the globe.
If they're out there and they're driving in their vehicles, they ought to be scared because we're looking for them.
This just into the Fox newsroom, a frightening moment for citizens in Hawaii as a ballistic missile alert gets sent to citizens accidentally. The screen grab was sent out by Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, and she reiterated that the alert was a false alarm. People in Hawaii received this morning stating a ballistic missile was inbound, but authorities have said the alert was sent out by mistake. That is confirmed at this moment.
The lingering effects of extreme winter weather at the start of January has created quite a mess for JFK Airport, with damaged equipment and dozens of delayed flights, not to mention scores of unhappy customers. And JFK in New York is not the only airport seeing major headaches. Our Brian Yennis joins us from New York on the latest. Hi, Brian.
Yeah, Mike, look. Hey, Mike, look, if you have not noticed, chaos at America's airports has made headlines recently. Last weekend, we reported about one air traffic controller, what he called a, quote, horror show at JFK Airport here in New York City. Dozens and dozens of planes sat on the tarmac for hours filled with passengers. Thousands of bags were delayed or never made it to their destinations. People slept at the airport for a couple days, and then a water main broke, flooding the international terminal. So weeks before that, the world's busiest airport, Hartsfield in Atlanta, lost power, canceling more than 1,150 flights. The recent airport fiascos underscore the infrastructure concerns at our nation's airports. So the American Society of Civil Engineers recently gave our nation's airports a D grade. Airport congestion is on the rise, creating a drag on the economy. And ASCE says it's expected that 24 of the top 30 major airports in this country may soon experience Thanksgiving peak traffic volume at least one day every week. And if you look at this graphic, you know, last month, the nation's airports released a report saying they require $100 billion in infrastructure needs between now and 2021 because of this congestion. That price tag has gone up 32% in just 2 years. Airports want Congress to eliminate caps on passenger facility charges. They want the FAA to allow them to charge more than the max $4.50 per passenger so that they can invest that money in infrastructure. And meanwhile, there are efforts to modernize our air traffic control systems. The president wants to privatize air traffic, stripping the responsibility from the Federal Aviation Administration, giving that responsibility to an independent, non-governmental, nonprofit organization. The administration believes this will speed up modernizing our air traffic control systems nationwide. And the FAA is currently handling the so-called Next Gen program, which is updating our 1950s era radar systems to satellite radar technology, which would lead to less delays and more efficient performance. And they hope to be done by 2025. And, you know, currently, Mike, there's a 48-member bipartisan congressional group called the Problem Solvers Caucus. They met on Tuesday. They're trying to draft $1 trillion infrastructure bill. We'll see what happens.
Brian Yennis on our travel drama in New York and elsewhere around the country. Brian, many thanks.
Of course.
Now from the halls of the Pentagon to the front lines in Afghanistan, Iraq, and South America, a new documentary gives you, viewers, a front row seat to the battle against extremism.
The number one priority for us is to protect the homeland and the American people from an attack, and also to protect our allies from attack against violent extremists. The most important thing is surround yourself with good people and take advantage of the talent that we have in the U.S. military.
Filmed over the course of 18 months, the series includes never-before-seen images from the very front lines of war. Scott Boggins is the executive producer of Chain of Command, this series. It premieres Monday, and he joins me now live. Scott, this is just an incredible project. We're really excited to have you with us to tell us a little bit more about it. I want to ask you first a question about timing. Essentially, why now? You know, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have been raging for 16 plus years. What made you and then the Pentagon decide that this story needed to be told today?
It's a very important story that we're telling. It has been years in discussion between National Geographic and National Geographic Studios and with the Department of Defense. You know, as you had mentioned earlier, we had started filming about a year and a half ago, and we started very slowly. And when you do this type of show, it's all built on trust. because we were allowed into privileged worlds that have never been, they never had cameras allowed in before. And we wanted to do it through the eyes of men and women who are most involved in the fight against violent extremism.
And you talk about footage that has never, things that have never been allowed, access that has never been given before. One of those, as I understand it, is we've never gotten to see live footage out from inside an F-22 before. Is that right? And we see that in the series?
Well, that's correct. On a combat mission, that's exactly right. And so these are the worlds in which through discussion and through obviously these are very sensitive worlds, and these environments that we're in are extremely fluid and very kinetic at times. And so, but Chain of Command is really a collection of soldier stories. It is about the men and women who serve. It's told through their eyes. You get a greater depth of the larger stories, the larger story. You get a greater depth of their mission, but you understand their sacrifice, you understand the commitment, and as we go into these worlds, you're basically what we describe as you're in the room, and the way we define the room is you could be in the drone room, just outside on the outskirts of Mosul, or you can be in the cockpit, or you can be with a father and a mother who are saying goodbye to their 3 kids under 5 as they about to deploy to Afghanistan. Now, there have been many documentaries great documentaries on the men and women who serve and in these environments, but
I don't think,
Scott,
not one that we know of where you really get inside the minds of service members and their families and get to see life sort of through their eyes, from their perspective. I wanted to ask you particularly about one thing that really struck me when I was reading about the project. The strategic plans that are hatched by top military brass at the Pentagon have these sort of real, very real effects for service members and affect the trajectory of their entire lives, service members on the ground. And one of the things you really wanted to do here was sort of connect the dots so that folks understood that. Do you feel like you got any answers?
It's playing out over a section of time where, again, we started, for example, with the Battle of Mosul. We were there at the beginning, right when it kicked off, and when we were there towards the end, and that plays out in the first 4 episodes. So through the men and women on both the U.S. side and also with the Iraqi forces, you understand their mission, you understand the complexity of that environment. You see, like you said, we're in the drone rooms in several occasions, and you understand how difficult it is, and you get greater depth of the fight, for Mosul, and
so
to take it back
Scott
to my
Boggins, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We've got to leave it there. We're out of time, but everybody, stay tuned. Look for this series premiering on Monday on Nat Geo. Scott, thanks so much for bringing the story to us.
Thank you. No.
Mike?
Back to our Fox News Alert now. More details on that frightening moment for citizens in Hawaii when a ballistic missile alert was sent to citizens by mistake. Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard tried to reassure Hawaii residents on Twitter, and she reiterated that the alert is a false alarm. People in Hawaii received this warning just after 8 o'clock in the morning, stating that a ballistic missile was inbound, but authorities have said the alert was sent out by mistake. For more, let's bring in Lucas Tomlinson, Fox News Pentagon producer. He's on the phone now. Lucas, I know you've talked with folks at Pacific Command. What are they saying?
Well, Mike, they're saying this is a false alarm, that this was a message being pushed out by Hawaii's emergency management system. There's no word right now on why this message was sent out. Was this simply somebody hitting, the wrong key, or was this a possible hack of the system, which has been a strong concern for a lot of people involved? The biggest problem is, who wants to wake up on the island of Hawaii to this kind of message? You have a PGA golf tournament going on at Wailea Country Club.
Right.
You have, millions of people living their lives. Nobody wants to, on a Saturday morning, wake up and the first thing they see on their phone, checking text messages, is take cover, seek shelter. A ballistic missile is inbound. And, of course, this system has been put in place very recently because of the North Korean ballistic missile threat after testing successfully 3 intercontinental ballistic missiles last year.
And, of course, folks in Hawaii have been on edge with all the tensions with the North Korean regime and have been practicing for what happens if there's an emergency situation. We have some video we can show folks at home exactly what they've been doing in Hawaii to prepare.
And, Mike, that was a sound people had not heard since World War II.
Excellent point, Lucas. And so imagine waking up to that on Saturday morning in picturesque Hawaii, and you think there's an incoming missile coming perhaps from the North Korean regime. Must have been very alarming, and people must be quite rattled at this point. So we don't know the cause at this point, Lucas. I know it's very early.
We don't know the cause. We have lines out, but right now there's just no cause on why this message was sent out inadvertently and clearly has alarmed many million residents.
Well, quite an alarming situation. Thank God it was a false alarm. And Lucas Tomlinson, thank you so much for your reporting.
You bet. Credit to Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard for telling everybody not to panic.
No doubt about it. Thank you, Lucas.
You bet.
Yeah, I mean, kudos to the Congresswoman for getting that info and out to constituents. I mean, I can't even imagine how bone-chilling it must be to be out on a Saturday, you know, living your life with your family, and you hear, you know, the sounds of those alarms are very, very eerie.
Absolutely.
And disconcerting.
Reminds of like nuclear alerts of when you were growing up, you know, that kind of thing.
And you have no sense of what the danger really is. You know, the folks on the ground hearing this for the first time didn't know that it was potentially a missile or something else. You know, you imagine that, you know, doom and gloom is a few seconds out. It must just be terrible.
And Tulsi Gabbard got the information quickly and got it out, but it took a while to find out whether this was legit or whether this was a false alarm. She sent the tweet out, and hopefully a lot of folks in Hawaii got that information promptly and were able to calm down pretty quickly. But just stunning when you consider the world we live in these days, the North Koreans doing all kinds of tests, and the fear that perhaps it's not going to be a test or a false alarm.
You know, we're hearing that there was 35 minutes, Mike, between the alarm and then the all clear, you know, the mistake being declared. So that's an awful long time for folks on the ground to be left wondering and maybe panicking about what has happened.
No
35 minutes.
Yeah, I mean,
unbelievable.
You can imagine the panic, 8 o'clock in the morning, like, what? We're under attack?
Right.
Got to run, load up the family, like, where do we go? Is it nuclear?
I guess we should probably stop complaining about the weather on the East Coast.
Right, exactly right. But thankfully, false alarm in Hawaii, and thankfully that Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard got the information, alerted her constituents, and they were able to calm down about 35 minutes after the initial alert went out. There'll be all kinds of investigation now to try to figure out whether somebody pressed a button, whether there was a hacking, whether, you know, exactly what led to this. But a tough way to start your day in Hawaii. Imagine folks on vacation or people who live there who are living under this threat of North Korea, hearing those sirens first thing this morning.
You know, that will be the million-dollar question now going forward, is the investigation into what exactly went wrong. I don't know if we still have Lucas with us, but maybe we can ask him. Lucas, do you have a sense of what the procedure is taking this forward, how they can rectify the situation or at least prevent it from happening again in the future?
Well, although it's not a U.S. military system, this is, you know, Hawaii's emergency management system. This is a lot like the Amber Alert system that's been set up, and for better or for worse, now with technology, you can reach out and touch people very quickly. So, you know, within minutes, you know, millions of people on the islands of Hawaii had, you know, a message saying this missile was inbound. In terms of the investigation, they're going to have to go back in the logs. They're going to find out, you know, interview all the people present. You know, was this some, you know, inadvertent, you know, keystroke? Somebody spilled something on a keyboard, or is it more sinister? And that is, you know, we've documented at Fox. You know, all these systems are prone to hack. Was this an outside actor? Is this somebody trying to have a little bit of fun at great cost? And we now have to find out in Hawaii, you know, how bad were people impacted? You know, anybody drive off the road? Anybody, freak out at home. You also have this PGA golf tournament. How does that affect just people living their lives, but also all the big events that, of course, go on in Hawaii around the clock.
In a post 9/11 world, you don't take alerts for granted or think that they're not anything less than quite deadly serious. And so you can only imagine the panic a lot of folks felt this morning in Hawaii. Thankfully, it was a false alarm, but all kinds of information now to figure out how to prevent this from happening in the future. You don't want to, cry wolf with your constituents and say, leave your house, run, and then all of a sudden, God forbid, if there is an actual an attack of some sort or an emergency at some point, you don't want people to say, it's another false alarm.
Right. And then everybody becomes this false sense of, blasé-ness when it comes to these kinds of alerts that really do, at the end of the day, end up saving lives, protecting people. Lucas made a really interesting yet chilling point that I hadn't thought of, which is perhaps this wasn't a mistake. Perhaps this was some kind of motivated attack against the United States by an infiltrator. We don't know. This is just speculation, of course, at this hour. But if this was not an accident, who is the perpetrator, and how can they be stopped, and how can this be? How can we prevent this from happening again? It's very scary.
If you're just joining us just before the top of the hour, folks in Hawaii woke up this morning to an alert on their phones telling them there was an emergency, perhaps an incoming missile. 35 minutes later, Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard got the information that it was a false alarm. She tweeted out quickly in all caps with a sense of urgency that this is a false alarm. There's no incoming missile to Hawaii. I have confirmed with officials there is no incoming missile. And so now the question is, at this point, is this breaking news, trying to figure out why this happened, who's responsible, was it a mistake, was it a hacking? These days we don't feel like our personal information is secure, and so is it a foreign actor or what caused this?
And Lucas, I want to ask you, while we've still got you on the line here, we're hearing from U.S. Pacific Command, from their spokesperson. They're confirming that it was a false alarm. Do you know? Do you have anything else on that? Can you tell us what you're hearing from your sources?
Yeah, Jillian, the U.S. Pacific Command is based in Hawaii, and they track all of North Korea's ballistic missile launches. So when the U.S. Pacific Command does put out a statement like that saying this is a false